Hi, everyone. This is your host, Kristen Howe, and I am so excited to welcome you to our call with our guest today, Margaret Paul. After practicing traditional psychotherapy for 17 years, Margaret felt discouraged with the results for both herself and her clients. She had spent years trying to heal from her own dysfunctional and abusive background, but still suffered with anxiety and relationship problems. So she looked for something that worked not only quickly and deeply, but something that would help people create loving relationships, inner peace and joy, and not just for a day or a week, but permanently. Now, for over 30 years, the process she and her partner developed, called inner bonding, has helped thousands of people to find that place of joy and power inside of themselves. And this process has been changing lives for individuals, couples, and people in business relationships. Margaret holds a PhD in psychology and has appeared on numerous radio and TV shows, including The Oprah Show. And on today's call with Margaret, you will discover how you have been rejecting yourself rather than loving yourself. You'll find out the link between anxiety and depression and self-abandonment. You'll find out why loving yourself is the opposite of selfishness. You'll discover the 6 steps, and Margaret's going to take you through these, to taking loving care of yourself, and you'll find out how to access the information regarding what is loving to yourself in different situations. So situations with yourself and also situations with other people. So I can't wait for this. I think this is something we really need to be talking about, so this is perfect timing. Margaret, thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to this call.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
I can't wait. I love your energy. I can't wait to have everybody get to, share a little bit of you. So actually, let's start with a little bit of you and have you share a little bit of your story. And, I just gave sort of a hint at some of your turnarounds, but I think it's really helpful for us to hear, maybe some of the most significant turnarounds for you, where you went from not manifesting the life relationship with yourself that you desired to now having those things in your life.
Well, I was brought up, like a lot of people, to be a caretaker. I was brought up in a family where everybody made me responsible for their feelings. I was an only child, and everybody seemed to look to me. And the way that I learned to be okay was to try and make every single person in my family happy. And, it seemed to work as a child. But, you grow up doing that. And, of course, I married somebody who also wanted me to make him happy, and I went about doing that. I kept doing it for my parents. I kept doing it for him. I kept doing it for my kids until I reached a place where I was exhausted and sick. And I knew that if I kept on doing this, I was going to die because I was completely depleted from giving myself up so much and trying to make everybody else happy. And I at that time, I thought that doing that was so loving. And it came as a huge shock to me to realize that I was actually trying to control how people felt about me because I wasn't loving myself. And that's when inner bonding, fortunately, came into our lives through spirit. When I met Dr. Erica Chopich, who's the co-creator, she had half the process and I had half the process. And that's when we put this together. And I realized with all the years of therapy that I had had, all the training that I had, there was not one single therapist that ever said to me, you're suffering because you're not taking responsibility for your own feelings. You are rejecting yourself rather than loving yourself. Not a single one ever said that to me. And I think that's amazing that that's true. So that became the basis of the inner bonding process is intention, is either our intention is to control how other people feel and to control our feelings and control the outcome of things, or our intention is to love ourselves and eventually be able to share our love with others. And that is that those two intentions are the only intentions that we can have at any given moment, and that became the basis of the inner bonding process. And that's changed my life completely. I started to get better physically. I started to get better emotionally. Everything changed. I started to be able to manifest what I wanted in my life. I started to be able to access my higher wisdom and find out what was best for me. I mean, just everything changed. I can't say that it was easy at the time to go from being a caretaker to taking care of myself because, when you've been taking care of everybody else all your life, they don't like it. when you start taking care of yourself. And they didn't like it. And so it was hard. But looking back, I'm just so grateful that I made that choice, because I'm sure that I would have been dead by now if I hadn't.
Yeah, and I love that you say that, because it's not over dramatic. This really is that important. I mean, your health, your well-being, everybody listening, it relies on this. Would you agree with that, Margaret?
Oh, I absolutely agree to that. I mean, I work with people all the time that are ill in one way or another, and I can see that because they're not taking loving care of themselves, they're creating so much anxiety and stress. And you know that the research indicates that stress is the number one cause of illness. That when we go into stress, we activate the fight or flight or freeze response. And when we activate that response, what happens is that the blood goes out of our brain. We don't think too well. It goes out of our organs, goes out of our immune system, goes into our arms and legs for fight or flight. And when we're constantly stressing ourselves, which comes about when we reject and abandon ourselves, we are depleting our immune system, which was what was happening to me. And that's why I say undramatically, I would have been dead, because I was very sick at that time because of the stress that I was causing by my own self-abandonment.
Yeah, and I'm so, like I said before, this is such an important conversation. So let's start by, because, we hear this, love yourself, you have to love yourself, and it's like, okay, what the heck do you mean? It's
that's
so
right.
far, right? It's so far from so many of us that we're like, that's a nice theory. So what do you mean by that, by love yourself?
Well, love yourself means that you are willing to take 100% responsibility for your own feelings, your own pain, your own joy, in all areas, emotionally, physically, spiritually, financially, organizationally, and relationally. These are the 6 areas that I've found we have to really be attending to ourselves and taking loving care of ourselves, because if we're not taking care of ourselves in any of those areas, we cause a lot of pain to ourselves. And anytime we're abandoning ourselves, we cause a lot of pain to ourselves.
Okay, so how do we abandon ourselves? Because you even say, people literally are rejecting themselves and abandoning themselves. So how does this show up?
Well, I've isolated 4 ways that people abandon themselves. One is because when we were young, we could not manage big, painful feelings. Like if we were not loved in the way that we needed to be, which most of us weren't, then it felt very lonely and heartbreaking. And we had a lot of helplessness over others and a lot of grief. And these are very, very hard feelings. And so what we learn to do is we learn to go up in our head. We learn to kind of disconnect, to dissociate from our body, which is where the feelings are, and go up in our head. But if you can imagine being a parent of a child, and the child is hurting, and the parent is just completely disconnected from the child and up in their head and distracted, the child's going to feel rejected. The child's going to feel abandoned. Well, that's what happens now. We're in our head, and we're disconnected from our feelings. And if we call our feeling self the inner child, which we like to do because we know we're responsible for a child. Most people don't think about being responsible for their feelings. But if you say, well, your feelings are like an inner child, then you can begin to understand that you're responsible for that child. And so if there's feelings going on that need to be attended to, and one of the things that's really important for people to understand is that all of our feelings are informational. They are informing us. So that our feelings of anxiety and depression and guilt and shame and anger, we call these the wounded feelings. These feelings are letting us know that we are not loving ourselves, that we're abandoning, rejecting ourselves in some way. So if we're going to take care of our feelings, we have to know, we have to be available to feeling these feelings. And then there's the core painful feelings of life, the loneliness, the heartbreak, the grief, the helplessness over others. These are really big feelings that we need to attend to with a lot of compassion and caring and tenderness. And so, when we're in our head and we're not connected with our body, we don't even know that we're feeling these feelings. And so that's a major way of abandoning ourselves. And then many of us have learned to judge ourselves pretty harshly. We tell ourselves we're not good enough, we're not adequate, we're losers, we're ugly, all kinds of things that we tell ourselves. And of course, if you were to tell these things to a child, that child would feel very rejected. Yeah. And so when we tell them to ourselves, we're rejecting ourselves. And then the third way is that we turn to a lot of addictions. And once again, the child analogy, if a child comes to you hurting, and instead of attending to the child, you grab a drink or you smoke a joint or whatever, you graze the refrigerator, and you don't attend to the child, that's what happens on the inner level. Most people have learned to use various addictions, whether it's substances or processes and activities, to avoid their feelings. And that makes the child feel abandoned and rejected. And the fourth way is another addictive process, which is that we make other people responsible. It's like if you had a child and you walked around the neighborhood knocking on doors and saying, "Here, would you take care of this child? I don't want to take care of him or her." That child would feel very rejected. Even if somebody wanted the child would feel rejected. And so we do that on the inner level. We look for somebody to love us, to validate us, to approve of us, to make us feel worthy, to make us feel safe, instead of taking responsibility for learning how to do that for ourselves. And so anytime we make somebody else responsible, that's what's happening. We are rejecting ourselves and abandoning ourselves, and that makes us feel really scared and really badly. So those are the four ways that I've found.
Yeah, and it's so, as you go through them, I'm like, oh, and by the way, I love your analogies with the child because it makes it so clear. It makes it, It's like, oh, of course. Now, talk to me about this. How do anxiety and depression link into all of this?
Okay, well, again, if you imagine that you're doing any of these things to a child, it's going to make the child feel anxious and depressed and angry and hurt. And so when we abandon ourselves, we're actually creating that anxiety and depression and anger and guilt and shame and all these really difficult feelings that so many people struggle with and take drugs for to avoid feeling. And to me, these feelings are important. They're important to be in tune with them because they're letting us know, there's some way that I'm abandoning myself. I don't want to block the feeling out. I want to notice how I'm treating myself, what I'm telling myself that's causing these feelings. One of the things that I teach my clients is that anxiety is a way that inner child is letting us know that the wounded part of us, which we all had to create, that ego wounded self, that's the part of us that learned to go up in our head, and that's the part of us that was programmed with a lot of false beliefs about us not being good enough, a lot of judgments, a lot of beliefs about how we can control other people and outcomes. This is actually programmed into a place at the base of our brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is a survival mechanism, and that's where the fight, flight, and freeze response is in us. And so that part of us gets programmed with many, many, many false beliefs. And when that part of us is in charge, which is like a child or adolescent that's been programmed with all these beliefs, and that part of us is telling us these things, like, oh, you're not good enough, or you'll never amount to anything. I mean, if you think about telling a child that child's going to feel really badly, feel depressed or anxious. Well, that's what happens on the inner level. When we allow that wounded part of ourselves to operate from those programmed false beliefs, we create that anxiety and depression. And so for me, I've learned that if I get a prickle of anxiety, I mean, I don't tolerate it at all now. If I just get a little prickle, I stop, I breathe, I say, what did I just tell myself? Whatever it is, it's a lie. It's coming from that wounded part of me who really doesn't know anything, who's just programmed. And then I go to my higher wisdom. We teach people how to connect to their higher self and how to access the truth. And I'll be talking about that in the 6 steps. And I go to my higher self and I say, well, what's the truth? And I access the truth. And when I do, then I don't feel that anxiety. And so I used to be a very anxious person, really, really anxious. And I don't have anxiety now because number one, I have a deep faith in my higher guidance, which I've developed through the inner bonding process. And number two, because I'm going there all the time and asking for the truth. And the truth does not make us anxious. It's the lies from our wounded self that creates the anxiety. And so, when people learn and practice the inner bonding process, they heal that anxiety and depression.
Okay, what I'm hearing here is that anxiety and depression, and I love that you said, people take drugs for them to not feel. So it's almost like those are the symptoms that we have been abandoning ourselves. So we can use them as clues as to what's going on so we can actually heal. Am I getting
That's exactly right. Yeah, we
Okay.
want to know that. I mean, it's just like if you had a child, wouldn't you want to know, if you want to be a loving parent, you want to know if that child is anxious or depressed so that you can do something about it.
Okay. And does it matter, let's say someone's been struggling with anxiety for years. Does it matter how long this has been happening? Can you still get to the bottom of things?
Oh, yes. It does not matter how long it's been happening. I've worked with people who have been anxious for many years or been clinically depressed for many years who have completely healed that through the inner bonding process because it's like, again, I keep bringing in the child analogy, but if you were to adopt a child who had been, in foster care or had been abused, and that child's going to feel, be very anxious, be very depressed, be scared, be shut down, not trusting. But if you bring that child into a very loving family and you're consistently there and consistently loving with that child, then that child starts to heal, starts to trust, starts to feel better about themselves because they're receiving love. And that's what happens on the inner level. When we start to love ourselves, we begin to heal all that.
And actually, I do love that you keep bringing up the inner child. So keep using it because it's such a great, it's such a great way for us to see it without getting clouded by ourselves, if that makes any sense. Okay, right. So what about the people who are listening and they're going, I know I need to love myself. I know I need to rebond with myself and heal all of this stuff. And yet there's still that sort of that message that they have within them that is, loving yourself is selfish.
Well, it's an interesting message that so many of us were brought up with. It's a message that I got too. It's a message that we were taught so that our parents or other caregivers could control us. If we're being told that taking care of ourselves is selfish rather than doing what somebody else wants us to do, then that's a program that we were taught so that, instead of taking care of ourselves, we would take care of other people. And actually, the real definition of selfish is when you expect somebody else to put themselves aside for you. Now, think about that for a moment. When you expect somebody else to not do what they want to do, but instead do what you want them to do, that's being selfish. But taking loving care of ourselves is the most unselfish thing, because what happens when we take loving care of ourselves is that, first of all, we learn to define our own inner worth, and we learn to recognize that we have a soul that's absolutely wonderful and beautiful and spectacular, and that this soul wants to express itself in very loving ways on the planet. So part of learning to love ourselves is learning to define our intrinsic worth, who came here to express love. And so the more we learn to love and value who we are, and the more we learn to tap into our source of love, which is our higher self, our higher guidance, and bring that down inside our own heart and soul, the more filled up we get with love. And the more filled up we get, then that love begins to overflow. And then what we want is to share it with others. And that's just the most beautiful thing in the world, is to be filled up with love and just so want to share it with other people. And imagine if everybody in the world were actually loving themselves and taking responsibility for their own definition and their own happiness and their own pain, instead of blaming other people and making others responsible. Imagine the world we would have if everybody was filling up with love and overflowing and wanting to share that love with each other.
It's so true. I mean, you even just begin to imagine that, and a huge smile comes across my face as, it's one of those things of, oh, wow, that is so important, and this is so essential. Okay, so can you take us through what the 6 steps of inner bonding are?
Yes, be happy to do that. So step 1 is the willingness that you have to be willing to feel your feelings, because if you're going to numb out and stay in your head and avoid them with addictions and all sorts of ways of numbing them out, then you cannot even start the process of loving yourself. So you have to be willing to feel whatever's going on, and this takes time. For me, because I was so programmed to be there for everybody else, when I started doing inner bonding, I had no idea what I felt. I was completely out of touch with my body, and it took me a lot of practice to get, to move from being external into being internal. And that's what has to happen in step 1, is that we need to get present inside our body, not being up in our head, not being, externalized, but present inside our body with our feelings, being conscious, being aware, and wanting responsibility for our feelings. That is step 1, wanting responsibility. And then in step 2, once we're aware of what we're feeling, we put our focus in our heart, and we consciously move into the intention to learn, as opposed to, as I said, the intention to control, to protect, to avoid. That's not going to get us anywhere. We move into an intention to learn. And when we move into that intention, we are creating what we call an inner bonding loving adult. The loving adult is who we are when we're open to learning. And we open to learning, we invite the love and the compassion, the presence of our higher self into our heart, so that we are truly a loving, compassionate, kind, caring adult. And then in step 3, from that adult place in our heart, dialoguing with that child, that feeling part of us who, let's say, is feeling anxious. Let's say we tune in step 1 and we realize we're feeling anxious. We go into our heart, we move into an intention to learn, we invite in the presence of spirit, become a loving adult. Then in step 3, imagine that you're this loving, kind adult, and you're talking to an anxious child, and that's your inner child. And you're saying to that child, I really would like to know what I'm doing or what I'm telling you, how I'm treating you, that's causing you to feel this way. And so we're really wanting to know, what are we doing? Not what somebody else is doing, but what are we doing that's causing this anxiety? Now, if it's a core painful feeling like heartbreak or loneliness, then we might be saying, well, what's happening with this other person, or what's happening with this situation that's causing this? But if it's anxiety, we're causing that. And so we say, what am I doing? What am I telling you? How am I treating you? And then we go inside and we allow the feeling part of us to answer. And, inner bonding is a roadmap that a lot of other processes can be a part of. Focusing is a wonderful addition. All of these things that people like to learn, it can be a part of this. And so we go inside, we focus in on our feelings, and we allow the feeling a part of ourselves to answer. And the feeling part might say, well, you're ignoring me, or I'm feeling anxious, and all you're doing is grazing in front of the refrigerator, or you're just going to yell at somebody instead of taking care of me. I just feel invisible to you. I feel like I'm not important. You don't care about me because all you're doing is trying to get rid of my pain. You don't even want to know about me and what you're doing. And that's what you're doing. You're rejecting me. You're avoiding me. You're making somebody else responsible. So it's a dialogue process. Or you're telling me that I'm not good enough. You're telling me I'm a loser. You're telling me I'm never going to make it. You're telling me I'm going to be on the streets. You're telling me that I better be perfect and I better do everything right. And you're putting pressure on me. And, it could be anything that's causing the anxiety. And so once we understand what we're doing, then we do another level of dialogue, because now we want to dialogue with the wounded part of ourselves who's got the false beliefs. And we would say to this part, you're telling the child that he or she is not good enough. There's got to be a good reason that you're telling a child that? Where does that come from? And what's the point? And, there must be a good reason that you want to judge or put on this pressure. What do you hope for by doing that? And so it's a very deep exploration process of coming in touch with our false beliefs and where we got them. And of course, this is not an instant process. It takes some time to learn. But it's very, very powerful as we become aware of these false beliefs about how we're treating ourselves. So then once we get a clear picture, then we go to our higher guidance. And people might think it's very, very difficult. But really, when you're open to learning, our guidance exists at a particular frequency. It's just like if you turn on the TV to a particular channel, you're tuning into a particular frequency. Well, our higher guidance exists at a particular frequency. And the good thing is that the thing that taps us to that frequency is the intention to learn about loving ourselves. So when we're in a true intention to learn about loving ourselves, we raise our frequency high enough to access our spiritual guidance. And so in step 4, we're saying to our higher self, well, what's the truth about any of these beliefs? Like, let's say my wounded self says, well, I'm judging because that's the way to motivate you to do everything right. Well, then we go to our higher guidance and we say, well, what's true about that? What's not true about that? And we're also asking our guidance, what is the loving action towards my child? What would make my child feel loved, feel valued, feel important, feel safer? And then we open and we allow the information to come through us. Now, again, this is a practice. When I first started doing it, I thought I was making everything up, and I had to test it out over and over again to see if the information really was coming through. But eventually, after doing it for a long time, I realized, wow, I really am being guided in my highest good, and the information that I'm getting really does work for me. But I had to test it out a lot. So once we get the information about the truth and the loving action, then in step 5, we take the loving action. Once we take the loving action that we've been guided to take, then we go to step 6 and we see how we're feeling. Again, we check in with our feelings. And if we've taken a loving action based on the truth, we're going to feel a sense of relief. We're going to feel a lot more peace. We're going to feel a lightening up of anxiety, a lightening up of depression, lightening up of guilt and shame and all of that, a lightening up of anger. We're going to start to feel a whole lot better right away. This is, as soon as we take loving action for ourselves, as soon as we start to operate from the truth, we're going to feel a whole lot better. And that lets us know that we've taken a loving action. So if we don't feel a whole lot better, then we go back through the process to see what other loving action we need to take. And sometimes we need to do this a number of times until we come up with the action that really creates that deep sense of relief inside. And when I work with people, it's amazing to them because, even if they might have been anxious for a very long time, like I just worked with a woman today who was anxious for a very long time. And just within, 10 minutes of the session, she says, oh my God, I feel so much better. I'm not feeling anxious right now. And so it happens quite quickly once we're operating out of the truth and once we're taking loving action for ourselves. But of course, this isn't a one-time thing. I mean, this is a way of life. And, I do this, like I said, anytime I'm feeling anything other than peace inside, I'm in there taking a look at what I'm telling myself and how I'm treating myself. Because I don't, at this point, it's not tolerable for me to feel anything other than happy and peaceful and joyful in my life. I love that. And I don't want to be hanging out in anything other than that. So immediately I go into my inner bonding process.
I love that you said it's a way of life. Now, I would imagine as you do this, it probably gets faster, and you naturally would just become much more clear in the process. Am I correct about that?
Oh yeah. I mean, right now I can generally do it in less than a minute. Is that the minute I see that I'm telling myself something, I right away tune into what it is. I see where that comes from. I go to my guidance. I see what the truth is. I tell myself the truth, and that's it. And if I'm in an interaction with somebody else, I can do that. Like if somebody is angry or withdrawn or being unloving in any way, I will immediately, I can feel the loneliness in my gut when somebody's acting that way. It just never feels good in your heart and soul. And I immediately go to my guidance and say, what's loving to me right now? Is it loving to me to, find out what's going on with this person, move into an intention to learn with them? Are they going to be open to that? Is it loving to me to disengage and help myself to not take this personally and to, just go do something for myself that would feel good? But I have to ask every time to find out, okay, in this particular situation, what would be loving to me? But once you've practiced that, it becomes easy to do that.
And so that's what you just said is really what we can do literally, because, we talked about, all right, different situations are going to come up, whether it's a situation completely with yourself where you just go, oh, something's off, or with other people, as you were just referring to. So this is the thing to do so that we identify what is loving to us in those moments. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Otherwise, you see, most of us, we didn't have good role modeling for taking loving care of ourselves. I mean, how many of us had parents that really role modeled a personal responsibility for themselves? And so that's why we need to learn to go to our higher selves, because that becomes the role model. That becomes the guidance. That information is actually there. And when we're in an intention to learn, our frequency is high enough to access it. And that becomes the role model for loving action.
I love that. Okay. Can you quickly just, restate what the 6 steps are, just so we're like, oh, okay, boom, boom, boom. But you know what I mean?
Yeah. So the first step is the willingness to feel your feelings and wanting responsibility for them. Okay. Step 2 is moving into the intention to learn and connecting with your guidance so you become a loving adult. Step 3 is the dialogue process with both your core child and your wounded self to discover the false beliefs. And step 4 is going to your higher guidance to discover the truth and the loving action. Step 5 is taking the loving action. And step 6 is evaluating how you're feeling as a result of that.
Fantastic. And then, as you said, you might need to go through again to take more until you feel that relief, correct?
That's right, until you feel the relief.
Amazing. Okay, let's talk about, there's the one word, and it's the word that has been coming up since the beginning of this call, and it is so important, and yet so many people have a negative charge on it, which is responsibility. So many people freak out at that thought of taking full responsibility, and I think that's because they associate it with blame. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, people do associate it with blame because lots of times as children we were blamed, who's responsible for this, and we were blamed. And what people don't realize is that being able to take responsibility for ourselves is an incredible freedom. It takes us out of the victim role of having to wait for somebody else or rely on somebody else or somebody else has to tell us we're okay in order to feel okay, or somebody else has to value us for us to feel valued. I mean, that's a victim place. And that's a very, very hard place to live. And when we put ourselves in that victim place, then we have to try and control how people feel about us. And, we'll do that with giving ourselves up and with getting angry or blaming or, various kinds of compliance, withdrawal, resistance, just a lot of ways to try and get control and to not be controlled at the same time, because nobody wants to be controlled and everybody wants to be in control. And the whole thing of trying to get love is exhausting. It's just exhausting. And when you take responsibility for learning to love yourself, then you want to be in a relationship to share your love rather than to get love. And that kind of relationship is such a joy. It's a learning, growing relationship with two people who are taking care, loving care of themselves, and then coming together to learn and grow and have fun and share their love and ignite their passion and all the wonderful things that can happen in a relationship. But when you're not taking responsibility, then, you're abandoning yourself. You're creating a kind of emptiness inside that feels really bad. And then you want somebody else to fill that up for you. And then you have to have control over that. And that's what creates problems in relationships. So for me, taking responsibility is like a sacred privilege. It's like, oh boy, I get to do this. I get to take care of myself. You know, when I had kids, I felt that way about having kids. I felt it was like such a sacred privilege to have a child and to take responsibility for that child, because we do have to do that with children, with babies. They can't take care of themselves. And I feel the same way about taking care of that child within me, that it's a sacred privilege to do this. It allows me to take action in ways that bring me joy. Whereas if I make somebody else responsible, wow, that's what I did for so many years, and that's why I was so miserable for so many years. So it has nothing to do with blame. It has to do with being empowered and, you know, having the power to take care of ourselves. That's such a wonderful thing to me.
I agree, 100%. Okay, now let me bring up the other thing that I do know can happen, which is someone goes, okay, good, yes, that is empowering, and I do take responsibility, and I want to take responsibility, and then they're in a relationship, and the relationship, there are struggles within that relationship, so they start doing this or any other process to, you know, work on sort of not fracturing themselves off anymore and healing and all of that. And then responsibility flips, and they want to have responsibility over the other person having to join them in the process. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Well, yes. I mean, what happens is that, yeah, you know, if you're in a relationship and you're doing this work, you want to share it with somebody. And if somebody doesn't want to join you on this path, there's that loneliness again. There's that feeling of helplessness that most people will do anything to avoid. There's the heartache and heartbreak of not being able to connect with this person. So, of course, we want to avoid those feelings, and we do it by trying to have control over getting the other person to be on the same path, to take responsibility for themselves so that we can share this. But that obviously doesn't work. Nobody, you know, likes it. They feel invaded. They feel controlled. They go into resistance, and they don't like it. And so one of the things that I tell my clients when they decide to learn to love themselves is be prepared for some rocky times, because you're changing the system. You know, you got together with your partner and you created a particular system. Everybody creates a system. And, for example, maybe it's a taker-caretaker system. And, you know, one of you is taking care of the other person. The other person is, you know, coming from a fairly narcissistic position of just wanting to be taken care of. And let's say you've been the caretaker all that time. Well, like I said earlier, if you decide to take care of yourself, that other person's going to be angry because you're changing the rules. You're changing the system. Now, with the people that I work with more often than not, the other person eventually says, you know, I can see that you're making yourself a whole lot happier and you're a whole lot better off, and I'd like to learn to do what you're doing. And then they get on the path. But you have to be prepared for the person to say, look, this is not what I bargained for, and I'm out of here. This is not what I want. I want somebody, you know, that's drinking, or somebody that's drugging, or somebody that's caretaking me and giving themselves up, or somebody who's having sex anytime I want, even if you don't want to, or whatever. And so, you know, we can't predict what the other person's going to do, but we can become a role model for personal responsibility. And really, that's the way that we influence people, not by talking to them and telling them what they should be doing, but by doing it for ourselves and becoming a role model of, you know, being much more happy and peaceful and joyful in our lives. And very often, the other person will say, you know, I want some of that. I like that. That looks good. I want to know what you're doing. And they'll join in.
Very cool. Okay, so let me ask you this, because I want to talk a little bit more about the, you know, what is loving to myself in this moment. You know, I'm sure for so many people that begin this, as you said, when you first started doing it, you had no idea what you were even feeling, right? So do people tend to at first struggle with, I don't even know what would be loving to myself in this moment? Or is that when you're truly tapping into your higher self, that answer tends to show up? How do we handle that?
Well, of course they don't know at the beginning. And,
Right.
it's like, if you want to learn to play the piano and you learn the chords, you don't expect to play in Carnegie Hall. It's a process.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of practice. And anything worthwhile takes practice. And this takes practice. And it takes support, because there are people who do know and can help you discover what's loving to you. They don't have to learn to do this on their own. There's a lot of support for learning how to take loving care of yourself, learning how to access that higher wisdom. But people do need to be willing to take the time to practice. A lot of people say, well, this is going to take up too much time. But in reality, my experience is that it takes way more time to deal with the effects of abandoning ourselves, and in relationships to deal with the effects of trying to get somebody else to do it for us and trying to have control, than it does to learn to take loving care of ourselves. It actually, for me, it created a whole lot more time, because I was spending a lot of time on the effects of self-abandonment.
Yeah, I don't think we realize how much time we spend doing it, trying to please other people and trying to live for other people and
right.
caretake. And so that's a huge, I'm really glad you brought that up, because where it might seem like, oh, this is going to be hard and difficult, and, you are spending more time probably than you realize in
right.
your self-abandonment, right?
Yeah, that's right. It takes up way more time, and it takes up way more energy. Ultimately, when you're practicing inner bonding and you become better at it, and you're tapped into your spiritual guidance, you're tapped into a source of energy that's endless. And one of the things people comment on me a lot is that I have high energy. I mean, I just go like a ready bunny. And they say, don't you get tired? Well, of course I get normally tired like everybody else, but I'm tapped into a source of energy that is endless. It's like the difference between operating as a flashlight, where your batteries are going down, and operating plugged into an infinite source of electricity. And so
right.
When you're operating out of your ego wounded self, your batteries are wearing down and you're getting tired. But when you're plugged into your higher source, you're receiving energy from that source that is amazing. It's amazing. And it's creative, and it guides you in your passion and your purpose and your highest good. And it's just wonderful to have that source of love and wisdom that's always here for us. It's just a completely different way of living life. I just would never go back to how I was living before. It's just not even living compared to what life is like now.
Well, yeah, I mean, and what you said is so spot on. It's exhausting. It's tiring. So for anybody, listening, who you're like, you just feel tired and exhausted and depleted in that way, that would be an indicator that this is going on. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be an indicator that you're operating off your own energy rather than off the higher energy. And truly, that you can plug into that energy and just allow it to come through you, and you'd be amazed at the amount of energy you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can, it just like switching from, and I like the batteries, to plugging into the infinite source, you can do that very quickly, even just with with like a computer. Let's say you've got your computer running on battery. Well, you can switch it to plugging into the infinite source of energy very quickly. So is it similar with us? Can we do that?
Yes, it's the same way. Yeah, and the computer analogy is a good one, because when we're operating out of our wounded self, we're operating like our computer, not plugged into the internet. We've programmed our computer. It's got all these programs in it, but where is it going to get us? I mean, we can't access any real information from those programs, but we can use our computer and those programs to tap into the internet, and it only takes a minute to get there.
Yes. I love that, because I think people don't, especially when people have been struggling with anxiety, depression, feeling depleted and exhausted for so long, they don't realize how close they are to this. The source is still right there. So I'm so excited that we're having this conversation, because, as I said in the beginning of the call, it's so important. I mean, this is absolutely essential. You said it yourself perfectly. You strongly feel that you would have died if you didn't take care of this. So I
have no doubt.
No question, right? And I love that. I mean, wow, can you get more passionate about something than that? I don't think so. So it's amazing,
right?
Right. Actually, with that, that thought, because of course you've shared your story with us, which is I love, by the way, that that's how you came up with this, is for you at first. This is something that you use still consistently.
Oh yeah, all the time.
I'm curious what's possible for people who are listening. So can you take a few minutes and share and I know there are so many, but some of the amazing turnarounds that you've seen from people who have applied this?
Well, I've just seen people, move out of years of depression or years of anxiety and discover their passion and purpose. I've seen people who have, relationships that aren't working, heal their relationships. I've seen people who want to be in a relationship, learn to love themselves and then draw in a loving relationship. I've seen people who, were on drugs or alcohol, completely changed their life around. I see people lose, 100 or more pounds because they started taking care of themselves and they didn't need to fill up with food. There's just so many things that have happened. There's tons of testimonials of people who have completely changed their lives, who have, gone back to school, who have gotten new jobs, who have regained their health, who have let go of various substance and process addictions over and over and over again, and some of them quite quickly.
Wow, that's great. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I would guess that once you start doing this and once you start the process of the inner bonding, that it's not like it's just going to affect one area of your life. I would imagine it affects every area. Am I right about that?
It affects everything. That's what I was saying. It affects, your work, all of your relationships, your finances, your health, just all of it. Because when you're taking care of yourself, you're learning to take care of yourself in all of those areas. Plus, what's happening is that you're learning to raise your frequency. Right. And when you raise your frequency, then you're able to manifest what you want in your life. Manifestation is a process that comes from operating out of a higher frequency. And so, the whole law of attraction is that like attracts like. So if you're operating out of a low frequency, then you're attracting that. And if you're operating out of a high frequency, then you're attracting that. And so life changes dramatically when you shift your frequency into the intention to learn. When you move into the intention to learn about loving yourself, that automatically raises your frequency. And that's when you can start to attract into your life what you really want. You start to be able to manifest your dreams.
I love that. And that's what we're doing here. This is why I'm here, and this is why I get excited about, sharing you with everyone, is because of that, because this truly is, not only is it the way to heal and take responsibility and have this, it's, as you said, having that responsibility and taking that responsibility is a very freeing thing. It gives you that sort of level of control over your life. I love that. I love helping people do that. And obviously there is, so much to learn from you. So what I did, everyone, is I asked Margaret to create a special offer. She did. And this is for everyone who's listening to the calls. Highly encourage you, go to the link and follow along, because Margaret's going to talk us through what we'll find there. So we've made it really simple, and you can just click that special offer button that's on this page and you'll be taken right there. And Margaret, I'd love if you could talk to us about what we'll find there.
Well, what you're going to find there is a really incredible course where when you sign up, you will be receiving an email every day for 30 days. And in this email is going to bring you through the 6 steps of inner bonding. Sometimes in the email, there's a visualization. Sometimes there's a video. And at the end of it, there's always an action step. And included will be some coaching calls where people have in the past asked questions that I've answered, and that's going to help you understand the process better. So this course includes a lot of things, and it's extremely supportive in terms of learning and practicing this process. And I just really encourage people to take this. They're getting a real bargain in this 30-day at-home course. It only takes about 15 minutes a day. It's not something that is a huge time commitment because people are busy. And in 15 minutes, they'll be able to, hear the visualization, watch the video, read the email, and then during the day, focus on one aspect throughout the day. It's a practice, so that in itself doesn't actually take time, because it's just something that they're going to be, noticing and doing throughout the day. And so I'm really excited about people taking this course. When I've been teaching this course, people have absolutely loved it. And so I'm really excited for your listeners to be taking this course.
Yeah, I am too. And what I love about what you've done is you have done something unique in that you've broken it down into, you've really made it something that it's like, oh, okay, 15 minutes a day. And you're sort of taking us by the hand and leading us through those 30 days so that we're really integrating it into our lives. It's not like it's just all thrown at us and then, and so I love that you've done that, and that is very unique and I think is a huge benefit.
Exactly. I am taking people by the hand, leading them through it, and it's life-changing. It's just life-changing for them. And once they have all this material, they have all the emails, they have access to all the videos, they can download them, they have access to all the audios, to the coaching sessions that they'll be getting. They can go over them over and over again. If they miss one, that's okay, because they can go back and they'll have it. They'll have all of them. If they don't have time in a day, that's okay. They can go back and do it. And many of the people tell me that they've done it 2 or 3 times, and that each time they go through it, they receive benefit. And so once you have all this information, you have it. It's yours for life.
Yeah, I love that. I was just going to ask you that, so I'm so glad that you said that people do that, where I would imagine you go through the 30 days and then, there might be a point where then you're like, ooh, I'm going to do that again.
Well, that's right. And many people have said, oh, I don't want the course to end. Oh, gosh, this has been so great. I don't want it to end. So I'm just going to start it all over again.
And it's almost like doing this, for anybody that's listening, and that question I brought up before of what if you're so far from what could possibly be loving to yourself in this moment that you can't even think of anything. This is actually, I think, and this is something that just came to me as we were talking, this is a way to start. I mean, this 15 minutes in a day is loving to yourself in those 15 minutes. Is that a good way to look at it?
That's absolutely right. And, they say it takes like 3 weeks to establish a habit. Well, that's going to help establish this habit in 30 days.
Yeah, that's very, very clever. I love that. I think how you've designed this is really going to be so powerful for so many people. As you said, life-changing. Maybe this is a crazy question. Is it possible to experience any shifts after like the first email, or should we not expect that?
Yeah, I think that people are going to be experiencing shifts throughout it. I've had feedback that people are saying after the first day or two, wow, I can't believe I didn't know that, and this is amazing. So, but, it really depends on the person really integrating the material, really reading it, really doing the visualizations, really listening to the videos and practicing. So it's really going to be up to them, how much they want to do it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I would guess, it is exactly what you just said. It's one of those things where, sure, you could start to feel and experience, shifts within you right away, and then it's just going to deepen,
Right, it's going to deepen. And as you go through the 30 days, it'll get clearer and clearer to you what you need to be doing to take loving care of yourself.
And it's so funny. I mean, me asking, can we expect to start experiencing shifts after the first day? I've personally experienced some shifts literally on the call with you today. So I can only imagine, where literally I'm like, oh, yeah, that's what that is. Oh, I can pay attention to that. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
For me. Everyone, you can just click that special offer button and you'll be taken right there. You don't have to type anything in. Margaret, you're amazing. I just love getting to share this time with you. I think everything you share is so valuable. You're so passionate about it. And you break it down in a way that it just resonates. It's so clear, and it's almost like you kind of go, oh, it's so obvious. Exactly what you said. I might not know that, right? So I really appreciate you, and just your energy and what you bring to these conversations. It's so full, and there's so much that we can already do just with what you've shared today. And I want to thank you for that.
Well, Kristen, thank you so much for a wonderful interview. I just really have enjoyed this time with you.
Actually, can I even just ask you for one more nugget? Like, is there one more thing you want to share with us before you send us off today?
Well, I've always got plenty of nuggets, but the thing that the thing that is most important is to really learn to see who you truly are inside. And this is part of what the course is going to help you do, is learn to see that you are not your wounded self, that you are your core essence, and that essence is the spark of the divine. It's beautiful. It's perfect. And when you really get that, then you will be very, very motivated to take loving care of yourself.
Perfect. I love that. And everyone, let that just sink in, because it's really powerful. Thank you again, Margaret. And I just love this. I can't wait till we get to do it again.
Thank you. Me too.
Fantastic. And everyone listening, you're extraordinary. I love spending this time with you. And until the next time, keep manifesting. Bye-bye, y'all.